prioritizing self-care in our lives. I will go first on this. I think for this one, I've spent a lot of years doing these are my parents. They gave birth to me. They did the best they could. So I'm going to send the obligatory Happy Mother's Day, Happy Father's Day message, no matter how I'm feeling about them today, and have done it not necessarily out of being in a healthy space, but as much of I'm going to be the good daughter. I'm going to do the right thing, in quotes, and do this. I think is how I have approached it. And I've been more mindful of that this year. I didn't do that on Mother's Day this year for the first time. I didn't kind of get sucked into that game. And I really had to like think about it. I'm like, for the first time, did not feel guilty, because before I'd always feel guilty because I had a lot of voices in my head from that group telling me that, you got to show up for your family no matter what. It doesn't matter what happened. You shove all that aside and you show up for your family, and don't be selfish and don't be self-right. All those kind of voices. It's like, no, for my health, this is where I'm at in my journey. And this is how I need to operate. So that's how I for the first time really did think about that this year. What about you, Braid?
Well, I think for this one in particular, for me, it's really important, especially at work I've been doing the last few years, to stay on that track of self-care, self-soothing, and self-compassion. Even as of recently, when I get off that track, I really get off that track and do some things that take me away from where I want to be and taking care of myself and all the rest. So it's particularly around these type of holidays, Mother's Day and Father's Day, where it can be difficult, where it can be triggering, obviously, for some. You can't operate from a space of clarity and a space of some of these other talking points we'll go through, of setting the proper boundaries and all the rest, if you're not taking care of yourself first. And from a standpoint of being able to self-soothe, if we're not doing that, we're not in our frontal cortex. We are not thinking through things. We are in fight, flight, fawn, freeze. And that would be triggering during these times. So for me, it's really about making sure I'm journaling, making sure I'm getting my morning walk in, which sets my day off right, making sure I'm enjoying music and having fun and singing, all those things for me to keep me on a path where I want to be self-regulated because of the self-care that I'm implementing on a daily basis.
Yeah. And I think listen to your body. For years, my body would send me messages when I was going into a situation where I was going to be in contact or in the same space as my biological family, and I didn't listen to it. I just shut it down, and I've stopped doing that. So listen to your body. And I think for those of you that have experienced losses, or you've got children that have experienced losses, again, listen to your body. What feels like the right thing to do today? What feels most honoring to you and the emotions that this day brings up, and do that thing and pay attention, and don't shove it to the side for the benefit of other people. Because like Brady said, if you're not showing up as your fullest, healthiest, most authentic self, then you're really not showing up as you anyway.
Couple things on that. Listening to your body, absolutely. It was a great point, Melissa. If we're in a spot where we are feeling that in our body and getting to a point where we are dysregulating, we need to remove ourselves from that environment, either from the thought pattern that we're having heading into that, or the physical space of, because it is not healthy to be in an environment that is being represented, or what's being represented in our body when we get there. The other thing would be that, and I think it's Glennon Doyle, but I may be wrong, if you have the choice between disappointing your family or anybody else than yourself, always disappoint somebody else.
Yeah.
You can't operate from a place of authenticity if you are constantly disappointing yourself. So if it's a choice, if you have to make a choice between the two, disappoint others. Do not disappoint yourself.
And it's a hard choice. So come back and listen to this to be reminded, if you need to, that it's okay to do that. And that leads really nicely into confidently setting boundaries. I think both Brady and I are in a space with both his family and my family of setting some boundaries that those people aren't used to receiving us in. I had to set some boundaries with his brother a few weeks back, and even in communicating those with his dad that they were very uncomfortable with. That is not how they're used to me showing up. And same with, for my own family, when you set boundaries with people that aren't doing the work and don't understand what boundaries mean, they're going to get very defensive sometimes. They're not going to like this version of you. They're going to say things about you because you're not showing up for them the way they are accustomed to or that they like. And so it can be very uncomfortable, but if those boundaries are necessary, like these are the things I will not participate in anymore. Brady and I, going back to Glennon again, I've talked a lot about lately of what kinds of feelings, emotions, topics, engagement will we allow in our space. Glennon and Abby used island, but will we allow in our space? What kind of emotions? Not people, but emotions. And then within the people, if this isn't something you're comfortable with, it's like love, no fear. If any of your conversations aren't loving, if any of your conversations or beliefs or feelings revolve around fear, that cannot be in our proximity and our space. And that can be very difficult for people to hear. But again, it goes back to, listening to your body and listening to your health and what you need in that moment to be the best version of yourself and your voice. I, for years, have let other people's voices in my head determine what I do. All those voices telling me I was selfish and ungrateful. And I'm starting to, for the first time in my life, 52 years old, find my own voice and say it confidently. And I can tell you the weight that comes off of you when you start doing that.
Yeah. And these things change and shift, right? I mean, If we go back to what has recently happened in my family, my dad inviting my abuser back into his home, I need to have a conversation with my dad that I haven't had yet. And without having that conversation about what boundaries that will mean are going to now need to be in place, it's not clear, it's not kind, it's not fair to him, but it is also not fair to me to continue to stave off that conversation and have it hanging out there. But until I express the boundaries I now need in place because of his decision on that front, we're at a little bit of a limbo, and it may not be comfortable. It may not be a great conversation by the end of it, but it's a conversation I need to have to establish the boundaries that I need to continue to heal on my journey. And that conversation has to happen because it's not fair to either one of us for it to be unspoken.
Yeah. And you bring up a good point on that is one, and this goes back to some things Sierra and Tim said in our conversation with them in the fall. If you're not communicating the boundary, it's just an expectation, and that's not fair to the person on the other side of it. So,
and you won't establish what you need to establish either.
Right.
Because they won't understand it, and they'll charge through that boundary you thought you set, or because the expectation you had for them and never set the boundary, they charge through it. And now we're frustrated or resentful or angry that they've charged through it. So it benefits both, even if it is a tough, difficult conversation.
Yeah. And I'm in the process right now of trying to figure out how to best express these boundaries. I'm discovering with my parents that we've been in and out of contact with over the years. And what I find I do, and be mindful of this, is I over explain.
Yes, ma'am, you do.
My therapist and my husband and my daughters are like, Mom, you don't need to over explain. And it comes from a place of fear, of defensiveness, that they're not going to understand, that they're not going to hear it. And I can't control that. All I can control is what I know I need to do to be my best, healthiest self, to heal in the ways I need to heal. And so I am in the process of trying to put together that conversation. I've recorded 3 conversations and deleted them because every time I've listened back to them, I'm like, nope, I'm over explaining. I'm not just setting the boundary. So if this is something to struggle for you, I do recommend recording it and listening back to it because it gives you a different lens. I don't think I really understood fully how much over explaining and justifying and convincing I was trying to do until I listened back to myself. And I was immediately like, no, too much. You cannot, nor are you responsible for them making you, the other person, understand something that if they're not doing the work and are not having that self-awareness piece in their life, they're not going to understand it no matter what you do. And it's not your responsibility to make them act in a way or fix them in a way that they will. It's your responsibility to precisely, concisely, without attacking, I try to talk a lot about behaviors rather than people. But short, concise in what you have to say and not feeling the pressure, which is hard. I am still working on this.
Awkward, brave, and kind.
Yeah. Thanks, Brene, because ain't that the truth? Taking care of our emotional health as much as our physical health. Brady and I both mentioned already listening to your body. So, and this ties in with your self-care for that day. Is what do you need emotionally that day? Do you need to go to a movie and just forget about the whole thing? If you've lost a parent, do you need to go do something they love to do that day to really honor them? Maybe you do that with your kids to help them walk through this tough time if they've just lost a parent. Let's do something we really enjoy to do together. Or maybe it's too soon for that and you do something the total opposite. But your body, I will tell you if this thing feels right or good or not, if you're tuned into it, your body language. And if you've got young kids that are still trying to figure out how to process emotions, this is a really opportune time to help them. Just ask them, what do you need today? How are you feeling? Ask yourself, what do I need? What do I need right now today? And then in addressing that, because they are tied together. If you just show up and do the obligatory show up, because someone's going to make you feel bad. If you don't, your sister's going to call and yell at you, or your mom's going to use passive aggressive language or whatever. You're going to pay the price for that. And you're not being true to yourself in that. So paying attention to what you need and knowing that if you don't, they're tied together. You're going to have to figure out a way to work it out later that day. And if you do fall into that same routine, don't beat yourself up for it. Later that day, like, I did that. What do I need to do for myself now to work through this?
And if you have difficult conversations, either on Mother's Day or Father's Day, and you're still going to have those because you want to have those, have a mental health plan for afterwards. If you're doing it via phone because you're not in the same area or Zoom, or if you're there in person and you leave the home, have a game plan to really come back to yourself, to come back into your body, to be present after that interaction, whatever it is for you. If it's deep breathing, if it is some kind of driving, if it's some kind of physical exercise, whatever it may be, have a game plan going into it so you're as regulated as possible. Have your interaction, your meal, your whatever you're going to do with family on these type of holidays, and then have a game plan for afterwards once you leave that engagement so that you're taking care of yourself. If you want to have some kind of interaction with Mother's Day or Father's Day family around this time, and it's difficult.
Or any day that you do it, for that matter. Doesn't have to be on these holidays. Living unapologetically is part of you can't live unapologetically if you're not being true to yourself. And also supporting, maybe you've got a great relationship with your parents and your parents have a great vice versa, but you've got a friend that this is a struggle for.
Or a sibling.
This is a struggle for. They don't have the same dynamic going on. You just like, how can I help you show up unapologetically today? What do you need from me today? But that starts with you being okay doing that yourself.
So, I mean, whatever you're doing to prepare yourself and make sure you're in a healthy place, if you're noticing those around you, whether they be friends or family that are struggling, having these type of conversations with them ahead of time, during or after, in support of them if they're having a difficult time. Reach out and support the community. So whatever your community is that needs these type of conversations and support, share.
Yeah, that. And also too, don't apologize for what it is you need to do, and support that other person in the same thing. If they start apologizing, like, no, we're not doing that today. This is not what we're going to do. We're here for each other unapologetically. Going back to your core values and what's important to you, really good. It goes back to that, your space, your island conversation of our core values change over time. As Brady and I have gone through our individual therapies and healing processes, our values have changed in what's in terms of what's come to the forefront. They've really started changing like 8 years ago when we moved to Chicago. But as we've done therapy the last 2+ years, have continued to evolve. So going back to those values as you go into these holidays to help you, remind you about being true to yourself, listening to your body, being unapologetic, confidently setting boundaries. Those values will help draw you back, I think, to that space, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, but be clear on your why.
Yeah.
Do that work. And it can change over time. You want to continually check your why, make sure it's still your why. And if not, what's your new why? But that why has to be the core of whatever you're going to do in this space. If you are moving through and working on healing and going down a path to be your true self, like I am, like Melissa's been working on, that why does evolve. And that why needs to be at the center, whatever your interaction is during these days. Because if you go away from that why, then you're disappointing yourself. We're going back to what we talked about before. You're going to disappoint yourself. You're going to maybe walk out of that going, I ran away from my why. And so have that why be your core and build a plan around that why. Mm-hmm. My why now is X, and I am going to show up for Father's Day or Mother's Day, but I'm going to show up in this way with my why at the center and not compromise that why.
Yeah. And this rolls nicely into living out of your own expectations versus others. I think both of these holidays are ripe with expectations.
Yeah.
Culturally, how you show up for your parents and as a parent, by your parents or your children, it is loaded with expectations. Are those expectations yours or are they others? And really taking a long, hard look at that as you look at how you're going to show up if this is a difficult day for you.
Yeah, that's an evolution piece too, right? We've been conditioned to show up on these Mother's Days and Father's Days a certain way, what we grew up with and what we passed down to our kids possibly. And those are just conditionings. Certainly with people being better at taking care of themselves, defining their why, living from their why, those expectations can and should change. And if they're outdated and somebody else is holding those expectations, set a boundary around it, because you don't have to live by those expectations anymore with all the work that you're doing. And be clear on that you won't adhere to that expectation anymore if it's something that is outdated and your family needs to move past. Articulate that, but don't just fall back into, expected expectations once or twice a year to keep the peace. Mm-hmm. Be true to yourself. Keep on your journey. Have the conversation beforehand. If you know that there's a certain expectation that's going to come up that you can't support anymore, have that conversation beforehand and take it off the table so it's not a surprise in the moment on that day. And you won't have to navigate that, or at least it would have been talked about and you can come back to that conversation on the day if you've had that conversation about expectation, which does not work for you anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. Great points. accepting the layered aspects. And Brady and I both have a lot of layers that we have already addressed.
Adding some all the time.
Yeah, a lot of layers on those. On these are bittersweet holidays for us. There are people that we enjoy celebrating in this, like my adopted parents. We love being celebrated by our own daughters. It's a little more complicated when it comes to our biological parents, of how we interact in terms of all the emotions we feel, of both being thankful we were birthed and that they did the best at the time that they could, but also acknowledging that wasn't good enough. It wasn't safe. It left a lot of trauma. And when people are either unwilling to do the work to see that with you or aren't able to, like, Brady's mom in memory care, these are bittersweet days for us. They are very layered. I think they can also show up for other people's experiences. Maybe this used to be a wonderful holiday you spent with your mother or father, but you've lost them recently. So the layer of traditionally, this has been wonderful, but wow, it's so hard this year. How do I both thankful to remember them in such an honoring way today, but both dreading this day because I'm remembering them all day. And that can be true with your children if they've had losses or they've never had that experience. They don't know how to feel on this day because they don't have healthy relationships with their parents. And they're surrounded by people and kids that are telling them all these things that they're supposed to feel. What do you do with all those layers, or those people that have shown up your life that have acted like parents that you're thankful for? Again, so many layers. Acknowledge that, feel all those feelings. Don't let this goes back to the weaponized gratitude conversation we had a couple weeks ago. Weaponized gratitude shows up a lot during Mother's and Father's Day, especially with people that aren't doing the work. Well, how can you not show up for your mom or dad that day? They did all this for you. It's like, yes, but all of this has happened as well. And it is for me to determine if this is the most healthy thing for me to show up in this way or not. So being mindful of those things and just the layers of emotions and not pushing any one of those emotions aside. Let them all wash over you. Don't prioritize. They all need to be worked through, and having an acceptance of that.
Well, and get comfortable. It's work. We're working on it. I'm working on it. Not doing it 100% of the time yet, but get comfortable with and both. There can be things that you need to work on, and you can still feel good, nostalgic about some aspects of your relationship with your father, or your kids, or your mother. It's not a one or other. There's very rarely any time that it's one feeling. We are having multiple feelings at every moment, 99.9% of the time. So get comfortable with and both. We can have two difficult truths together, one that may be a pleasant memory and one that is, we have to address something that just needs to be addressed in our relationship, dad or mom, that hasn't been addressed. They can be both things. It's not a one or the other.
Oh, thank you so much for bringing that up. That's such a great point, because I will tell you, in my house growing up, with all that's gone on and with all the current state that my relationship is with my parents, I still have some great memories.
Absolutely.
I had some great vacations and some great Christmases and some fun times spent together. That, so those things are true, and those things are good memories. That doesn't cancel out the tough and the trauma and the resulting ways that I developed because of the bad stuff. So one does not cancel out the other. And so being okay with that, and even in your conversations, if it comes up, well, what about this? Like, that is true. You are right. That is true. We did have that experience together. That doesn't make the other thing okay or cancel it out. So yeah, really, really good point there. The last one thing we're going to talk about, and kind of wrapping this all up, is living out F.E.E.L, finding empowerment, embracing layers, and how it affects you and the quality of your relationships. At the end of the day, I really believe if you're following these things we've talked about, these talking points, the relationships that are going to be in your life are going to be healthy. They're going to be fulfilling. They're going to be supportive. They're going to be unconditionally loving in a way that is great for both sides of the relationship. It also means, go ahead.
It's great for you. And then that other person on the other side of the relationship can decide what they're going to do with it or not.
Sure.
But you showing up authentically the way you want to show up in a kind, clear way is your responsibility and healthy for you. How that other person reacts to that, interacts with that is on them. They get to make their choice, and you can't control or predict how they're going to react to that. But you showing up authentically is the first step in that. And then the relationship goes forward from there and will take the path that it's going to take when you're showing up authentically.
True. And I think that in terms of healthy relationships, the people in your relationship will be doing the same thing.
Yes, agreed.
You cannot have a healthy relationship with people that aren't doing the same thing. It's on them to decide if that's something they want to embark on with you. This is where you find your empowerment, is when you are able to embrace all of your layers, all of these complications that come with our life experience unapologetically. I think that's where you're going to find you're in the most peaceful space.
From a finding empowerment standpoint, really doing these pieces that are your self-care, that are your journey work, is building that feeling that empowerment, and then embracing the layers that you're going to navigate in these relationships and these holidays that can have triggers and may be perfectly fine for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of in wrapping this up, we hope you find this helpful. We hope you find this empowering. In just, if you're one of those people, this is hard for you, you're like, oh man, okay, I'm not alone in this. And it's okay to say that. And it's okay to feel that. And it's okay to process that. It's okay to not pretend and try to live out the keeping the peace, others' expectations, or just be sad, or, whatever it is you need to feel within whatever this brings up for you. We hope, like I said, that you found this helpful. Great. I want to thank Brady for joining me today. This is a tough conversation for him, and I'm so proud and happy to have him by my side and to be vulnerable in this space. And I really believe that it's going to help somebody out there hearing these words and thoughts from you.
Well, it's always good sitting with you, babe. And I would just add maybe to your last piece there of those feelings and needing to work through things. Don't forget to tap into your square squad.
Yeah.
There's two of us right now in our square squad, and we got our girls and their partners, and we are very intentional about that square squad. Make sure you have a square squad to work through these things together with. You're not on an island by yourself. There are hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people going through these issues, one layer or another that you're going through. Find your square squads, lean into your square squads. There are so many great online support groups that can help with this as well. If you're feeling alone, you're not alone on this. There are people that you can talk with.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And if you need help with resources, reach out to us. Email me at embracinglayers@gmail.com. Comment on our Instagram, DM on the Instagram at Embracing Layers. We have access to a lot of resources, and we want to help you. Or if you just have anything to say about this conversation, I'm really curious to hear back from you, audience, about your thoughts about this conversation that we've had today. Hopefully we'll open some lines of communication for you and those that you're in relationship with. We thank you for joining us today. Again, like I said, follow us on Instagram at Embracing Layers, and we're thankful for you. We don't exist without you. We're getting ready to wrap up our season. We've got a few more great episodes coming our way, and before we start taking some time off this summer. But thanks so much for joining this conversation with us today, and let us know how you're feeling about it. We hope to hear from you, and have a great week.